I did 9 years in a military prison for a crime my company commander committed. And the day they finally let me walk out those gates, I drove home and found that man standing in my kitchen in his socks. And I let him keep that kitchen and the house around it and the smile on his face for 11 more months while I quietly took away every single thing he actually cared about. Now, before I take you through that front door, do one thing for me. Wherever you're sitting, right this second, drop your city down in the comments, because I sit and read those. All of them. And I'll say yours out loud at the top of the next story. And thank you for giving me this time today. I don't take that for granted. I really don't. If a like and a subscribe are somewhere in you on your way out, that's the whole thing that keeps a channel like mine breathing. Okay, so they let me out on a Tuesday morning in March, out of the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which is the only maximum security prison the military has, and which looks like a big beige office park sitting on a hill. My sister Bree picked me up in a Corolla with a cracked windshield. She hugged me in the parking lot and cried, and I didn't. I hadn't cried in about 6 years by then. I'd sort of misplaced the ability. We drove 2 days, and the whole way down I kept thinking about my daughter Emma, who was 3 the last time I held her, and was 12 now, and who I had 11 photographs of, total, because after year 2 the letters stopped, and after year 3 the photographs stopped. And I kept telling myself Nicole was just doing the best she could, raising a kid alone with a husband in Leavenworth. Bree went quiet around Knoxville. I asked her what. She goes, "Wes, when we get there, I need you to let me talk first." I said about what, and she just looked at the road. We got into Fayetteville on a Thursday, and Fayetteville in March smells like pine pollen and diesel, and it hits you like nothing ever moved an inch. Same Bragg Boulevard, same pawn shops. Even the Post had changed names twice while I was gone. Bragg to Liberty and back to Bragg again, like the world just shuffled the furniture while I sat in a cell. And I made her drive me to my house. 904 Ravenswood Drive, off Rayford Road. Brick ranch with a carport and a crooked mailbox I never got around to fixing. I bought that house in 2013 with a VA loan and my own signature. There was a black Tahoe in the driveway and a basketball hoop over the carport that I did not put there. I got out. Bree was saying my name. I went around to the side door because that's the one we always used, and it was unlocked because in that house it always was. And I stepped into my own kitchen, and Brett Halloran was standing at my counter in gym shorts and white socks, pouring coffee out of my grandmother's percolator. He looked up at me. He didn't drop the cup. He didn't even really flinch. He set it down slow and he goes, "Wes, hey, okay, hang on." Nicole came around the corner with a laundry basket on her hip, and when she saw me, the basket hit the floor, and behind her was a tall, skinny girl with my mother's chin, and she looked at me, this total stranger standing in her kitchen, and then she looked past me at him and said, "Dad, who is that? Dad." She said it like it was nothing, like it was a word she'd been saying every day for years, because it was. Understand something before I go 1 inch further. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I stood in the kitchen where I used to make pancakes on Sundays and looked at the man who put me in Leavenworth, and past his shoulder, I could see the door out to the garage, and I was thinking about the safe bolted to the concrete out there, because I helped him install that safe in 2015. He came over on a Saturday with a hammer drill and a case of Coors, and we anchored it into the slab together. And I never once asked him why he wanted a safe at my house instead of his own. I know. Believe me. I know. Okay, back up. Let me tell you who I was, so you understand how somebody ends up this stupid. My name's Wes Callahan. I grew up in Lumberton, 40 minutes south, in a house where the money ran out around the 20th of every month. I enlisted at 18 because that was the plan. There wasn't a second one. And I turned out good at it. Not the shooting part, the boring part. Property accountability. I could take a warehouse that looked like a tornado hit a yard sale and have every serial number reconciled in 4 days. Made staff sergeant in 6 years, which is fast, and I had the cleanest hand receipt file in the battalion, and I was proud of that, like it was a medal. Captain Brett Halloran took over the company in 2014. West Point ring, great big laugh, remembered your kids' names. He'd come into my cage at 7 in the morning with 2 coffees and ask how Nicole's nursing school was going. He came to the hospital when Emma was born at Womack, the 22nd of August, 2015, and stood out in the hallway with a stuffed elephant because he didn't want to intrude. And I thought that was the classiest thing I'd ever seen a man do. Write that date down somewhere. August 22nd, 2015. It saved my whole life, and I didn't know it for another decade. We deployed to Kandahar and came back that winter. Retrograde operations, which means we were the ones packing up a war. Containers going out by the hundreds, generators, vehicle parts, night vision, fuel. And a certain amount of stuff always vanishes in a retrograde. Everybody knows that. There's slack in the system, and Halloran knew exactly where the slack was because he signed off on it. I found out later he was moving about $4.5 million in government property out through a freight broker in Wilmington named Denny Marchetti. And every hand receipt, every transfer document had my name on it, my rank, my digital signature, my common access card number. Because he had my card. He'd just borrow it. Hey, Callahan, I need to close out the system, and you're at the range. Give me your sock, I'll bring it right back. And I handed it over. Every time. That's a violation, and I knew it was a violation, and I did it anyway, because he was my commander, and I trusted him like a brother. CID knocked on my door on a Wednesday in January of 2016. 2 agents, very polite, sat in my living room drinking my sweet tea and asked me to explain 42 documents. Every single one had me on it. I said that's my signature, but I didn't sign that, which is a sentence that means absolutely nothing to anybody, ever, in the history of the world. The court-martial took 9 days. Larceny of government property, conspiracy, frauds against the United States. And the thing that killed me, the thing I still think about at 4 in the morning, was Master Sergeant Dale Prosser. Dale was my warehouse chief, 22 years in, coached my flag football team. He sat in that witness chair in his dress blues and looked at the panel and said, "Sir, I watched Sergeant Callahan pull those pallets myself. He said I bragged about it. Said I told him I was setting my family up." I turned around and looked at Nicole in the gallery, and she was looking at the floor. The panel came back in under 2 hours. 9 years confinement, dishonorable discharge, reduction to E1, total forfeiture of all pay and allowances. Halloran testified too, by the way, character witness for the government. He got up there and said in this sad, heavy voice that he had trusted me completely, and that the betrayal of that trust was the hardest thing in his career. Sit with that one a second. He got promoted to major 11 months later and retired at 20 years as a lieutenant colonel with a pension. Prison I'll be quick about, because it's not the point. The place is quiet and beige, and it eats time in a way I can't explain. Year 1. Nicole visited 4 times. Year 2. Once. Year 3. I got a certified envelope with divorce papers out of Cumberland County District Court, and I signed them, because what was I going to do? And 8 months later, my mother told me on the phone, real careful, real slow, that Nicole had remarried. I asked who. She said, "Honey." I said, Who, Ma? She told me, and I put the phone back on the hook and walked to my cell and sat on the edge of my bunk and stared at the wall until they called count. And something in me went cold and stayed cold. And honestly, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because a cold man can wait. That's the year I started the file. I wrote the Records Center. I wrote the Army Board for Correction of Military Records. I wrote every soldier in that company, 26 letters, got 4 answers, filled 3 storage boxes with paper. And the whole time I kept coming back to one question I could not put down. Why in God's name did that man want a safe in my garage? Now, back to the kitchen. I didn't fight him that day. I turned around, walked back out the side door, got in the Corolla, and we drove to her place in Hope Mills, and I sat on her couch about 4 hours without moving. Here's the situation I was in. Convicted felon, dishonorable discharge, on parole, no VA benefits, no rank, no back pay, 38 years old, sleeping on my little sister's sofa in a town where everybody knew what I got convicted of. $1,100 and a duffel bag. He had my house, my wife, my kid, a defense contracting company on Owen Drive called Steadfast Logistics Group, a facility clearance, and a picture of himself with 2 congressmen hanging in the lobby. That's not a fair fight, so I stopped trying to make it fair. First thing I did was get a job. Tire shop out on Ramsey Street, mounting and balancing. $12 an hour under a guy named Ollie, who hired me knowing exactly what I was, because his own brother did 5 years at Butner. I kept my head down. I checked in with my parole officer the first Monday of every month, and on my days off I started walking backwards through my own destruction, one piece of paper at a time. Wave 1, I went to CID. Did it the right way? Appointment and everything? Wore a collared shirt I bought at the Goodwill on Yadkin Road. Sat across from an agent maybe 29 years old, with a Punisher skull on his coffee mug, and laid out my whole theory in a folder I'd spent 9 years building. He listened about 11 minutes. Then he closed the folder, slid it back, and goes, "Mr. Callahan, you were convicted at a general court-martial. That's a final judgment. You had appellate review. You're outside the window for a petition for new trial by about 7 years. I said, "Sir, I'm not asking you to reopen mine. I'm telling you he's still doing it right now, today, with federal contracts, on Owen Drive." And he looked at me the way you look at a guy with a folder. Kind of gentle, kind of already done with you. He said if I had actual documentary evidence, he'd be happy to take a look. And I said, "What do you think is in the folder?" And he stood up. I sat in that parking lot 20 minutes. And then I did something dumb, and I'll be honest with you about the dumb parts too, because everybody tells these stories like they were smart the whole way through, and that's a lie. I drove to the American Legion Post on Bragg Boulevard, because I knew Dale Prosser drank there on Fridays. I sat down 2 seats away and ordered a Coke, and he didn't recognize me for a good minute. I'd lost 30 pounds and gained a lot of gray. Then he did, and the color went out of his face, and he set his bottle down. He goes, "Wes." I said, "Dale." He said, "I heard you were out." And I said, 22 years, and you sat up there in your blues, and you lied about me. I just want to know what he paid you." Dale Prosser looked at the bar. He was maybe 60 years old by then, big soft hands, one of those flat retiree haircuts. And he said, real quiet, he said, "It wasn't money." I said, "What was it?" And he said, "My kid was in trouble." And then he got up off that stool and left half a beer and walked out the door. 15 seconds, that's all it was. But I drove home doing 60 on Bragg Boulevard, with my hands shaking on the wheel. Because a man who says it wasn't money is a man who's been sitting on something for 9 years and is tired of the weight of it. That little crack was the whole thing. Wave 2. I found Carabello. She'd been the company admin clerk, 19 years old back then, the one who scanned and filed everything. Out of the Army now, front desk at a dental office in Spring Lake. I sat in her waiting room 40 minutes until she got a break. She took one look at me and said, "Oh my God." We sat in her car with the engine off. She said the thing that never sat right with her was Halloran asking her to scan documents at weird hours on her own laptop. And then he stopped using her at all and started doing the transfers himself at night. And she figured he was just a workaholic. Then I asked her the question I'd been carrying for 9 years, the one I wrote on the inside cover of a legal pad in a cell in Kansas. I said, "Kara, does the installation still keep the badge access logs from the hospital?" She goes, "What?" I said, "Womack, every door in that hospital reads your card. Labor and delivery is controlled access. You cannot get in without scanning." She stared at me. I said, "There are 4 documents in my court-martial record signed with my card on August 22nd, 2015. My daughter was born at 10:51 that morning. I was in that ward all day. My card was on my chest, and it opened that ward door 6 separate times, and there is a log of it. Nobody ever pulled that log. Not my defense counsel, not the government, not me, because I was 29 and terrified, and I didn't know what I didn't know." Kara put both hands over her mouth and started crying in a Honda Civic in a dental office parking lot in Spring Lake, North Carolina. Now, here's where I got knocked flat, and I mean flat. I got greedy with time. Emma's school had a spring concert, and I parked across the street and stood by the fence like a creep and watched her walk in with a clarinet case. That's all I did. I did not approach her. I did not say one word. Somebody took a picture of me. 4 days later, a Cumberland County deputy served me in the shop bay with grease up to my elbows in front of everybody. Nicole had filed for a no-contact order, and the affidavit said I'd shown up at her home in a rage, that I had a history of violence, that I'd been surveilling her minor child. Some of it was shaped, and some of it was flat invented. But on paper, it looked exactly like what he needed it to look like. 10 days later, I violated it without meaning to. Emma's soccer game at a rec field off Cliffdale. I didn't know the order covered a 200-foot radius from her. I was on the far sideline, and Halloran spotted me and called it in himself and stood there with his arms crossed while they walked me to the car in front of 80 parents. I spent a night in the Cumberland County Detention Center on a parole hold. My PO could have sent me straight back to custody right there, and none of the rest of this would have ever happened. And while I was sitting in that cell, my sister was at her mailbox opening a letter from the correction board, 14 months in the making, denying my whole application in one paragraph for insufficient evidence of material error or injustice. That was the bottom, and I'm not going to dress it up. Concrete bench in county, denial letter waiting at home, a fresh criminal charge stacked on a felony record, and now my daughter had it in writing, from the state, that I was dangerous to her. Ollie bailed me out. $12 an hour tire shop, and that man put up his own money. I paid him back over 9 months, and he never once brought it up. And that's the week I quit trying to prove I was innocent and went after the thing he actually loved. Because Brett Halloran did not love my wife. He didn't even really love that house. What he loved was being Brett Halloran. Retired lieutenant colonel, patriot, job creator, the guy with the good table at the chamber luncheon. His whole life was a federal contract and a reputation, and both of those have a liver on them. I just needed somebody who knew where the liver was. Wave 3, Frank Odom. Retired CID warrant officer, 66, lived out toward Stedman. Kara found him for me. He was the agent who did the initial intake on my case before it got reassigned, and he remembered it. First thing out of his mouth, standing in his carport holding a wrench, was, "You're the supply sergeant." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "That case stunk." It stunk from day one, and I said so. And I got pulled off it and told to go work a barracks larceny in Bravo Company. I had to put my hand on the roof of a car. Frank walked me into a law office in Raleigh 3 weeks later. A woman named Sylvia Rand, who used to be a prosecutor and now did nothing but government fraud. She read my file for 2 hours without a word, then took her glasses off and said something I'll never forget. She said, "Mr. Callahan, I can't undo your conviction. Not directly. Not yet. But you keep asking me about 2015, and I'm looking at his invoices from last quarter." I said, "What?" She said, "He never stopped. Men like this never stop. He was moving stolen federal property in Kandahar, and now he holds federal contracts to move federal property in Cumberland County. And if he's billing for services he isn't providing, you don't need a court-martial. You need the False Claims Act. Under that law, a private citizen with original knowledge of a fraud against the government can file a case on the government's behalf. Under seal. The defendant doesn't even know it exists. Justice reads it in the dark and decides whether to come in." She said, "You were his supply sergeant. Nobody alive understands how that man moves property better than you do." We filed in the Eastern District of North Carolina in October, under seal, and for months I mounted tires on Ramsey Street and said nothing to anybody. And the whole time there was a sealed federal case sitting in a courthouse with his name in it, and he had no idea. Wave 4 was Denny Marchetti, the freight broker. Cape Fear Consolidated, still in business, warehouse off Castle Hayne Road in Wilmington. I drove down on a Saturday with Frank riding along, because Frank said, "Son, do not do this alone. You have exactly one credibility problem, and it's you." We caught Marchetti in the parking lot, guy in his 50s, gold chain, unlit cigar. He knew who I was in about 2 seconds and said he had nothing to say. Frank said, "Okay, then I'll say one thing and we'll go. There's a proceeding coming, and there's room in it for exactly one guy who came in first. After that, the seats are gone." We got 4 miles up the road, and Marchetti called Frank's cell. We met him at a Waffle House off Market Street at 9 at night, and that man talked 2.5 hours with Frank, recording every second of it, with his consent, which in North Carolina is all you need. Container numbers. The Shell Company. A fishing charter registered down in Southport that never chartered a single fishing trip in its life. And he said, I'm quoting him, "Callahan, I'm sorry. I thought you were in on it. He told everybody you were in on it." I said I know he did. So I had Marchetti, I had Cara, and I had the badge log, which Sylvia subpoenaed and which came back exactly the way I said it would. 6 card reads on that labor and delivery ward on August 22nd, 2015, on the same clock as 4 transfer documents signed at Warehouse 3, 8 miles away. I had all of it, and I still almost lost. Here comes the second gut punch, and this one's the worst one. In June, the Justice Department declined to intervene. Sylvia called me at the tire shop. That means the government reads your case and says thanks, we're not joining, proceed on your own. Good luck, which is the same as being handed a war and no army. Same month, Dale Prosser stopped taking my calls, and then Frank drove past Steadfast on Owen Drive, and there was Dale in a company polo shirt with a clipboard, working the loading dock. Halloran hired him. $74,000 a year and a company truck for a 60-year-old retiree who'd been pumping gas at a Circle K in April. Bought and paid for. Again. Right in front of me. And then the worst one. Sylvia got the no-contact order modified so I could send Emma 1 letter. 1. Reviewed by her lawyer. I wrote it 11 times. I told her I didn't do what they said I did, and that she didn't have to believe me, and that I'd be around whenever she wanted. No pressure. The answer came back on notebook paper in handwriting that looked like my mother's. It said, I don't know you, My dad has been at every single thing my whole life. Please stop. I sat in the lot of that tire shop with a piece of notebook paper and finally cried. 9 years late, ugly. Forehead on the steering wheel. Ollie standing in the bay door pretending to look at something. 2 days later, Halloran came to me, pulled the Tahoe up beside me at a gas station on Rayford Road, and rolled the window down, easy as anything. 9 years, and he still had that big laugh. He goes, "Wes." "Buddy, let's stop." I said, "Stop what?" He said, "I know you've been out talking to people. It's fine, I get it. I've got a facility in Sanford. I need a property accountability guy. Nobody's better than you. $85 a year. I'll handle the felony thing. I know people. You get to see Emma." And that was a real offer. And there was about 4 seconds where a very tired part of me looked at it. Then I said, "Brett, why'd you put the safe in my garage?" And his face did something. Just for a half second. The laugh stayed, but everything behind it went flat, like a screen turning off. He said, "Take care of yourself, Wes." And the window went up. That's when I knew that safe was still in there, and that he had never once been able to move it, because moving it meant explaining it to Nicole. Okay, here's where it turns. Sylvia had told me a declination isn't always a no. Sometimes it's a not yet. Sometimes it's just, we don't have enough to justify the resources. So we gave them enough. Marchetti's recorded statement went in. The badge logs went in. Kara's declaration went in. And then Frank did the thing I'll be grateful for until I'm dead. He took Marchetti's container numbers and cross-referenced them against Steadfast's current invoicing on a defense logistics agency contract, and found Halloran was billing the government for warehouse throughput at a Sanford facility that, going by the utility records, was drawing about as much power as a hairdryer. Empty building. $2.1 million in billing over 3 years for moving air. That's not old news from a war. That's a live federal crime happening on a Tuesday. Justice came back in, with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service and Army CID together. And the same young agent with the Punisher mug, the one who slid my folder back across the table, sat in Sylvia's conference room in Raleigh and could not look at me. To his credit, he said it out loud. "Mr. Callahan, I should have read the folder." I said, "Yeah, you should have." Then I asked them for one thing, and it was petty, and I don't care. I said, "When you do it at the luncheon." Because every November, the Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce does an awards lunch at the Crown Complex, and that year, Brett Halloran was getting Patriot Employer of the Year. He'd posted about it 4 times. There was going to be a general there. There was going to be a photographer. They didn't promise me anything. They told me they don't do theater. I bought a ticket anyway. $65. Wore the same Goodwill collared shirt. I sat at a table in the back next to a woman who sold commercial insurance and made small talk about the Panthers, with my hands sweating so bad I kept wiping them on my thighs. Watched the invocation. Watched Nicole at the head table in a green dress with her hand on his arm, and Emma next to her, bored on her phone. And they called his name. And nothing happened. He walked up, got the plaque, shook the general's hand, got to the microphone and did the whole speech, the one about how he learned everything he knows about taking care of people from the soldiers he served with, and the room applauded, and somebody at my table said, "What a good man." And I sat there with my heart going like a hammer, thinking, they're not coming. They read all of it, and they're not coming. And I burned 11 months and every dollar I had, and I'm going to mount tires until I die. He was walking back to his table when the doors opened. Not dramatic. That's the part nobody gets right in movies. 4 people in windbreakers and a woman in a gray suit, coming up the side of the room while the MC was still talking about the raffle. And the woman in the suit leaned down at the head table and said something to him that maybe 6 people in that ballroom could hear. And Brett Halloran stood up holding a plaque with his own name on it and put his hands behind his back. The photographer got that. The photographer got all of it. It ran in the Fayetteville Observer, and it went out on the Wire, and by the next afternoon, that picture was on every veteran's page in the state. I didn't stand up. I didn't say a word to him. No big scene, no speech, and I'd wanted one for 9 years. And when it came, I just sat there with a plate of chicken and let it happen. Nicole saw me on her way out, though, being walked out by a chamber volunteer with Emma under her arm. She looked right at me across that room, and she stopped for about 2 seconds, and then she kept walking. The rest of it took about 1.5 years because that's how the real world goes. Here's how each one landed. Dale Prosser flipped inside of 9 days. And when I say flipped, I mean he called the agents himself before they called him. Full statement about the false testimony and about how Halloran came to him in 2016 with a folder about his son's arrest in Harnett County and made it very clear how that could go one way or another. He pled to false official statement and obstruction and got 14 months, and he lost the thing he'd protected for 22 years because a federal felony lit his retirement situation on fire, and there's no ribbon rack in the world that fixes that. I went to his sentencing in Raleigh and sat in the second row on purpose so he'd see me. When it was over, he turned around in the well of that courtroom in a cheap gray suit instead of blues and said it out loud, in front of the judge and everybody. He said, "Wes, I'm sorry." I nodded at him. That's all I had. Denny Marchetti got the first seat, the one Frank told him about in that parking lot. 18 months, forfeited the warehouse on Castlehane Road, and Cape Fear Consolidated does not exist anymore. Steadfast got suspended from federal contracting in 3 weeks and debarred the next spring. Facility clearance revoked. The name came off the building on Owen Drive in about 4 hours. They unscrewed the letters and left the ghost of them on the brick, and it stayed like that for 1 year. Halloran pled out. He was looking at a lot more, and he took 11 years at Butner, plus forfeiture, plus a restitution number he will never in his life pay off. And he never got to be the guy who did his time in some quiet, honorable Army way. He went in like anybody else, and here's the part that mattered to him. When they walked him out of that ballroom, the general was standing 8 feet away. That man spent 9 years buying, with my life, the right to stand in rooms like that. They took it in front of the exact audience he built it for. The house was in the forfeiture. My house. And Sylvia unwound it. Took her 14 months, and I still don't fully understand how she did it. But my name went back on that deed. Now here's the thing I did with it, because people expect a different ending. Nicole was on that porch in April with cardboard boxes and nowhere to go, and I pulled in and got out, and she started crying before I made the steps. She said she didn't know. Said it over and over. I believe she didn't know at the start, and I believe she absolutely knew by the end. And I've stopped trying to sort it. I told her she had 1 year. Stay. Pay nothing. Figure it out. Not for her. I want to be very clear, it was not for her. She said, "Why?" I said, "Because Emma's got 1 bedroom she's ever had, and I'm not the one taking it." Nicole sat down on the top step in her work scrubs with her face in her hands, and I stood in my own driveway and did not comfort her. The record part came last, and it came quiet, the way that stuff does. Conviction set aside. Dishonorable discharge vacated. Characterization corrected to honorable. Rank restored. Back pay for 9 years, which after taxes and lawyers was less than you'd think, and more than I'd ever seen at once. The fraud case settled for a number. I'm not saying out loud, and my share of it is why I don't mount tires anymore. I still go by the shop Saturdays. Bought Ollie a new alignment rack, and he yelled at me about it for a month. I got the safe open, by the way. Locksmith on a Thursday, standing in my own garage. 400 and some pages of the real ledger, the paper one that was never in a computer anywhere, and a Nokia from 2015 with a charger rubber banded to it. He kept it at my house, because if it ever got found, it got found in the garage of the man already convicted for it. That was always the whole plan, from before he ever bought that hammer drill. That's the answer to the question I carried around Leavenworth for 9 years. Getting it took 4 seconds and felt like almost nothing. Emma, I'm careful here. She was 15 when she called me. Not a hug, not a reunion. She asked if I'd take her to get her permit because her mom couldn't get off work. We drove circles in an empty church lot off Cliffdale for 2 hours, and she stalled it 11 times and got mad at me twice. She's 17 now, and we're not fixed. She calls me Wes sometimes and Dad sometimes, and I don't correct either one. There's 9 years in the middle of us, and nobody gets those back. She asked me once, in the car, if I hate him. I said no, which wasn't really true. And then I said the true thing, that I stopped thinking about him a while back, and that's the closest to even I'm ever going to get. If there's anything to take out of this, it's just that a man who is very good to you in front of people is not the same thing as a man who is good to you. Halloran carried a stuffed elephant into a hospital hallway, so he wouldn't intrude on my wife. He remembered my kid's name. He anchored a safe into my garage floor on a Saturday and drank my beer and put his hand on my shoulder before he left. I don't know what you do with that. I still don't. I just know I hand my card to nobody now, and I read what I sign, and my hands went steady again after about 2 years. Anyway, I fixed the porch light. Still haven't fixed the mailbox. 9 years in a federal case, and I cannot make myself go get a bag of concrete.